The hangar fell silent as Commander Riker pointed at her. You used to fly, right, Lieutenant? Then take the F-35 up and show us what you've got. The crowd snickered. Everyone knew it was a joke. The woman who'd been demoted to logistics after that classified incident no one discussed. She should have walked away. Instead, she nodded and climbed into the cockpit as laughter grew louder. When the engines roared to life, something changed in Riker's eyes. Recognition? Fear? What he didn't know was about to reshape everything he thought he understood about sacrifice. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales of redemption and hidden valor. The hangar at Naval Air Station Oceana buzzed with pre-dawn activity, metal rafters catching the first hints of sunrise and casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. Most days, Lieutenant Merritt Calloway would slip in unnoticed among the maintenance crews and flight officers, her logistics uniform allowing her to blend into the background. Today was different. Today, everyone seemed aware of her presence. She stood near the rear wall, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor, watching the morning briefing preparation. At 34, Calloway carried herself with a precision that seemed out of place in the logistics division. Her uniform was impeccable, dark hair pulled back in a tight regulation bun, but something in her posture suggested a person accustomed to a different role entirely. The empty space above her left breast pocket where pilot wings should have been seemed to draw more attention than if they had been there. "Morning, Lieutenant," said Ensign Farrow, one of the younger officers who had never known Calloway as anything but logistics personnel. "Big crowd today. Commander Riker's SEAL team is observing flight ops." Calloway nodded without shifting her gaze from the podium being set up at the front of the hangar. "Thank you, Ensign." "Is it true you used to fly?" Farrow asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Before Calloway finally turned to look at him, her expression neutral, yet somehow causing the young officer to step back slightly. "We all have our assignments, Ensign. Best focus on yours." The hangar doors swung open wider, admitting a group of officers in combat utilities rather than flight suits. At their center walked Commander Thaddeus Riker, the hard lines of his face made sharper by recent desert deployment. His reputation had preceded him to Oceana. They called him Thresher behind his back, for how he chewed through subordinates who failed to meet his standards. Calloway's posture straightened imperceptibly as the SEAL team filed in. If anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed how her eyes tracked Riker specifically, might have caught the slight tension in her jaw, but no one was watching Calloway. Everyone watched Riker. The briefing began with standard updates, weather conditions, flight schedules, maintenance reports. Captain Alara Winters, the base executive officer, delivered most of it with brisk efficiency before acknowledging the visiting team. "Commander Riker and his men are here to observe our flight operations in preparation for next month's joint exercise," Winters explained. "I expect everyone to provide full cooperation and maintain the highest standards of professionalism." Riker stepped forward, scanning the assembled personnel with the calculated assessment of a predator, sizing up potential threats. His gaze paused momentarily on Calloway, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features. "My team specializes in extraction under extreme conditions," Riker said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hangar. "Air support is often the difference between mission success and body bags. I want to see firsthand what Oceana's pilots are capable of." The briefing continued, with squadron leaders outlining the day's demonstration flights. Throughout, Calloway remained still, her expression betraying nothing. Yet something in her demeanor had changed since Riker's entrance. A coiled tension, perhaps, or a heightened awareness. As the formal portion concluded and personnel began dispersing to their stations, Riker's voice cut through the general murmur. "Lieutenant Calloway." The hangar didn't quite fall silent, but a noticeable hush spread outward from where Riker stood. Calloway turned, clipboard still pressed against her chest. "Commander?" Riker approached, trailed by two of his team members. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're familiar with the F-35 systems, correct?" "Yes, sir," she answered, her voice steady but guarded. "Hard not to notice you're the only one taking notes during a flight briefing who isn't wearing wings," Riker observed, gesturing to her clipboard. "Remind me why you're in logistics now?" The question carried an edge of public mockery. Nearby conversations stopped entirely as personnel turned to watch the exchange. Reassignment following Operation Quicksilver, sir, Calloway replied, her voice betraying no emotion. Riker's eyes narrowed fractionally. Something passed between them, recognition perhaps, but twisted with something darker. The temperature in the hangar seemed to drop several degrees. Quicksilver, he repeated, as if testing the word. Wasn't that a training failure? The room tensed. Several senior officers exchanged glances. Captain Winters, still at the podium, watched the interaction with sudden intensity. That's what the report says, sir, Calloway answered, her composure unnervingly steady. A young ensign whispered to his neighbor, loud enough to be heard. She crashed a $20 million simulator, career suicide. Calloway didn't react, but her stillness became more pronounced, like a prey animal hoping to avoid detection through absolute immobility. Riker's smile turned predatory. Since you're so well versed in theory, Lieutenant, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate the F-35's capabilities for our visitors today. The room went silent. Everyone recognized the cruelty, asking a grounded officer to speak about flight technology she could no longer operate. Unless you've forgotten how to talk about flying as well, Riker added. Calloway met his gaze, something dangerous flickering behind her professional mask. I remember everything about flying, sir. The way she said everything caused Riker's smile to falter momentarily. He recovered quickly, but not before Captain Winters had noticed the exchange. Excellent, Riker said. I'll expect a comprehensive overview during this afternoon's demonstration. Technical capabilities, tactical applications, the works. Yes, sir, Calloway replied. As Riker walked away, flanked by his team, the background noise of the hangar gradually returned to normal. Calloway remained where she stood for several long seconds, her expression impossible to read. Captain Winters approached her, waiting until they were relatively isolated before speaking. I can intervene, Lieutenant. That was inappropriate. No need, ma'am, Calloway replied, watching Riker's retreating form. Some lessons need to be learned firsthand. Winters studied her for a moment. You know him, don't you? Beyond just his reputation. Calloway's eyes remained fixed on Riker. We've never been formally introduced, if that's what you're asking. That's not what I'm asking, and you know it, Winters said quietly. Calloway finally turned to meet the captain's gaze. Permission to be excused, ma'am? I have a presentation to prepare. Winters nodded slowly. Granted, but Lieutenant, whatever history is there, remember where you are now. I never forget where I am, ma'am, Calloway replied, her voice so soft it was nearly inaudible. That's been the problem all along. The morning light had fully infiltrated the hangar now, catching dust motes and golden beams that illuminated one side of Calloway's face as she walked toward the exit. The contrast made her appear almost like two different people, one bathed in light, the other shrouded in shadow. Later that morning, Calloway sat at her desk in the logistics office, methodically working through supply requisitions, while her mind raced with calculations of a different sort. The small office was windowless and utilitarian, a far cry from the cockpit she had once called home. A photograph sat face down in her desk drawer, visible only when the drawer was open. She hadn't looked at it in months, but she knew every detail by heart. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She closed the drawer before calling, "Enter." Ensign Farrow appeared, holding a sealed folder. "Delivery for you, Lieutenant, from Commander Riker's office." Calloway accepted the folder with a nod. "Thank you, Ensign." When Farrow had gone, she broke the seal and opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Marked Demonstrator Assignment, F-35C Lightning II. Below the official text was a handwritten note. "Show us what theory looks like, Lieutenant. 1400 hours." Calloway stared at the authorization, signed by Riker himself. For the first time that day, her composed expression cracked slightly, revealing something like disbelief mingled with realization. Her hand moved to the drawer, pulling it open to reveal the face-down photograph. Slowly, she turned it over. The image showed a pilot in combat gear, face obscured by helmet and oxygen mask, standing before a dust-covered aircraft. The desert mountains of Afghanistan loomed in the background. The photograph had been cropped, removing any identifying patches or insignia, but the aircraft was unmistakably an F-35. Her hand, tracing the outline of the image, trembled slightly. Calloway looked from the photograph to the authorization and back again. After a moment, she carefully returned the photo to its place in the drawer, face down once more, and closed it. By 13:55 hours, the flight line had drawn a considerable crowd. Word had spread about the special demonstration, though the exact nature of what would be shown remained unclear. Officers, enlisted personnel, even civilian contractors had gathered, forming a loose semicircle around the gleaming F-35 that sat on the tarmac. Commander Riker stood with his SEAL team, their posture suggesting this was entertainment rather than duty. Their quiet conversation was punctuated by occasional laughter, glances toward the approaching figures adding context to their amusement. Calloway appeared in a flight suit that seemed both too new and somehow wrong on her, like costume rather than uniform. Whispers followed her path across the tarmac. "This should be good," someone said. "Logistics trying to play pilot." $10 says she doesn't even start it up right, another wagered. Calloway walked with the same measured precision that characterized her movement in the logistics office, though here, in the open space of the flight line, it took on a different quality. She looked not out of place, but rather like someone returning to familiar territory after long absence. Riker approached her before she reached the aircraft. "Lieutenant, glad you could make it." "As ordered, sir," Calloway replied, her tone professional. "Just to be clear, this is a demonstration only," Riker said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Basic systems overview, standard startup procedure, nothing fancy." His smile returned. "Don't worry, no one expects much, just the basics. If that's not possible, well, theory and practice are different animals." "Yes, sir, they certainly are," Calloway replied, her tone unreadable. As she moved toward the F-35, an older maintenance chief, Master Chief Petty Officer Octavia Remington, intercepted her. "Lieutenant," she said officially, then lowered her voice. "The port thruster has a minor stabilization issue. Nothing critical, but you should." "No." Calloway's eyes flashed recognition. "Thank you, Master Chief." "Been a while since you've been in one of these," Remington added, not quite a question. "Not as long as some think," Calloway answered cryptically. Remington nodded, understanding passing between them. "Good hunting, Lieutenant." The interaction didn't go unnoticed. Lieutenant Commander Zephyr Nayak, one of the squadron pilots observing from nearby, narrowed his eyes as if trying to place a memory. He turned to his wingman. "Remington doesn't waste time on pleasantries with anyone. Why is she talking to logistics personnel?" "You don't know?" his wingman replied. "Calloway used to fly, before your time. Some kind of incident overseas, never fully explained. Word is, she was good. Really good." Nayak frowned, watching as Calloway approached the aircraft. If she was so good, what's she doing in logistics? That's the question, isn't it? As Calloway climbed the ladder to the cockpit, the crew chief handed her the helmet. Their exchange was brief but charged. "Beautiful machine," the crew chief said. "Temperamental in the wrong hands," Calloway responded. "Good thing it's in the right ones today." Sliding into the cockpit felt like coming home after years in exile. Calloway's hands moved across the controls with a familiarity that belied her time away. The seat conformed to her body as if it had been waiting for her return. She took a single deep breath, then began the pre-flight check with mechanical precision. Her movements were neither rushed nor hesitant, muscle memory taking over. Each switch, each system verification, performed with the unconscious efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Only her eyes, sharper and more focused than they had been in logistics briefings, betrayed how fully present she was in this moment. The comms crackled to life. "Control to demonstrator. You are cleared for basic maneuvers only. Altitude restriction 10,000 feet. Acknowledge." Calloway's finger hovered over the response button. Her eyes flicked to where Riker stood watching, his arms crossed over his chest, expectation of failure written in his stance. "Acknowledged, Control," she responded, her voice calm and clear. She completed the final pre-flight checks, each motion precise and economical. The canopy lowered and sealed with a pressurized hiss. Through the reinforced glass, the world took on a slightly different tint. Clearer somehow, more defined. This was her element. This was where reality made sense. The engines ignited with a low rumble that quickly built to a controlled roar. The initial thrust came with a troubling vibration. The port stabilizer issue Remington had mentioned. On the ground, Riker's smile widened, anticipating failure. But Calloway's fingers danced across the controls, making minute adjustments to the thrust balance. The vibration smoothed out impossibly fast. The aircraft began to move, rolling forward with increasing speed. From the control tower, Captain Winters watched with intense focus. Beside her, the air controller monitored systems readings with growing confusion. "Ma'am, these adjustments she's making, they're not standard procedure for an F-35 with stabilizer issues." "No," Winters agreed. "They're not. They're working, though, perfectly." Winters' expression remained neutral, but something like confirmation passed behind her eyes. "Lieutenant, pull Calloway's flight records. All of them." "Ma'am, her logistics reassignment was over a year ago. Before that—" "All records, Lieutenant," Winters interrupted, "including classified." The controller hesitated. "That would require your authorization code, ma'am. Those files are sealed at the highest level." "Then it's fortunate I have the necessary clearance," Winters replied, her gaze never leaving the aircraft, as it began to lift from the runway with unexpected grace. "Do it now." On the flight line, the gathered personnel watched with shifting expressions as the F-35 rose into the air. What had begun as anticipation of embarrassment was transforming into surprise, then confusion, and finally, for those with enough experience to recognize what they were seeing, astonishment. The aircraft didn't just take off. It ascended with a fluidity that made the complex machine seem like a natural extension of its pilot. The awkward vibration that had marked the initial engine start was completely gone, replaced by a harmony of systems working in perfect concert. Lieutenant Commander Nyack stared upward, his brow furrowed. "That's not basic flight. That's not even advanced flight. That's—" His wingman finished the thought. "That's art." In the cockpit, Calloway felt the familiar sensation of gravity releasing its hold as the aircraft climbed. The subtle pressure of acceleration against her body, the responsive feedback of the controls under her hands, the simultaneous awareness of dozens of systems functioning around her, these sensations flooded back as if she had never been away. A small smile, the first genuine expression she had shown all day, curved her lips. This was freedom. This was truth. Everything else, the logistics office, the whispers, the mockery, fell away beneath her as surely as the ground itself. She leveled off at 5,000 feet, well below her authorized ceiling, and began what should have been a simple demonstration of the aircraft's basic capabilities. Banking turns, controlled climbs and descents, standard maneuvers any competent pilot could perform. But even these basic movements in Calloway's hands became something more. Each turn was executed with a precision that made the observers on the ground involuntarily hold their breath. Each descent and climb maintained perfect angles, conserving energy and momentum in ways that spoke of intimate knowledge, not just of flight principles, but of this specific aircraft's unique characteristics. In the control tower, the air controller looked up from his console, face pale. "Captain, I've found something in the classified records." Winters took the tablet he offered, scanning its contents quickly. Her expression remained controlled, but her knuckles whitened slightly as she gripped the device. "Continue monitoring," she ordered, returning the tablet, "and open a private channel to Lieutenant Calloway's aircraft." "Ma'am, do it." The F-35 completed another perfect bank, turning back toward the base, as if concluding the demonstration. Then, without warning, it accelerated sharply, climbing at an angle that pushed against the aircraft's designed capabilities. In the control tower, alarms began to sound. "Control to demonstrator," the air controller said urgently. "You are exceeding authorized maneuvers. Return to basic protocol immediately." On the ground, Riker's expression darkened from amusement to concern. "What the hell is she doing?" Calloway's voice came back through the comms, calm as if discussing the weather. "Demonstrating subsystem recovery procedures, control, continuing with your permission." In the tower, the controller looked to Captain Winters, who nodded once. "Proceed, demonstrator," he responded, confusion evident in his tone. The F-35 leveled off briefly, then began a series of maneuvers that grew increasingly complex. No longer was this a basic demonstration. This was a masterclass in advanced tactical flight. The kind of piloting shown in training videos as the ideal to aspire to, rarely achieved in practice. On the flight line, the crowd had fallen completely silent. All eyes tracked the aircraft as it performed increasingly sophisticated maneuvers, the kind only the most experienced pilots attempt. Lieutenant Commander Nyack approached Riker, his expression troubled. "Sir, I've seen that flying signature before. What are you talking about, Nyack? Riker demanded, not taking his eyes off the aircraft. That's not just competent flying. He hesitated. That's phantom flying. Phantom? Riker's voice sharpened, head snapping toward Nyack. From the Ghosts of Kandahar footage, the unidentified pilot who extracted Razor Team during Operation. That's enough, Commander. Riker cut him off, suddenly pale. Nyack fell silent, but his eyes returned to the aircraft with new understanding. Around him, other pilots were beginning to exchange glances, recognition dawning. In the cockpit, Calloway's focus was absolute. The world had narrowed to the aircraft and sky around her, the instrument readings, and the feedback from the controls. This was no longer a demonstration. This was a statement. She executed a perfect inverted dive recovery, the exact maneuver used to extract a special operations team under heavy fire 3 years earlier, captured on footage that became legend among military pilots, but whose pilot remained classified. Her comms suddenly switched to a private channel. Captain Winter's voice came through, clear and direct. I have your complete file. Now, Lieutenant. A pause. Or should I say, Phantom. Calloway didn't respond immediately. Her hands continued to guide the aircraft through its dance with gravity and air resistance. Then, permission to demonstrate tactical evasion sequence, ma'am? There was a long pause before Winters replied. Granted, Phantom. Show them who you really are. What followed was no longer a demonstration, but a revelation. Maneuvers that told a story of combat experience far beyond what anyone in logistics should possess. Each movement of the aircraft spoke of battles fought, lives saved, and risks taken that could never appear in any official report. For 15 minutes, Calloway put the F-35 through its paces in ways few had ever witnessed. The aircraft responded to her as a violin to a virtuoso, each movement precise, intentional, and executed with a perfection that bordered on impossible. Finally, she brought the aircraft into position for landing. As with everything else, her approach was textbook perfect, the kind of landing instructors would use as an example for years to come. The F-35 touched down with barely a bump, rolling to a stop with the same controlled precision that had characterized the entire flight. The engines powered down, the sudden silence more dramatic than any sound could have been. On the flight line, no one moved, no one spoke. The assembled personnel stood frozen, as if witnessing something they couldn't quite process. Captain Winter's voice came over the general comms system. Demonstration concluded. All personnel returned to regular duties. No one moved. Slowly, the canopy of the F-35 raised. Calloway removed her helmet, her face showing no emotion as she prepared to exit the aircraft. The crew chief approached with the ladder, his movements respectful in a way they hadn't been before. As Calloway descended to the tarmac, the crowd parted before her. She handed the helmet to the crew chief, who accepted it with newfound reverence. "Beautiful flying, ma'am," he said quietly. "Beautiful aircraft," she replied. Calloway walked toward where Riker stood, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Behind him, his SEAL team had lost their earlier casual postures, standing at rigid attention as if in the presence of a superior officer. Captain Winters approached from the direction of the control tower, carrying a file folder with red classification markings. She stopped beside Riker, her expression unreadable. "Commander Riker," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent flight line. "I believe we need to discuss Operation Saber Dawn." Riker stiffened, his face draining of color. "Ma'am, that operation is classified." "Yes," Winters agreed. "It is. So is the identity of the pilot who extracted your team that day." She turned to Calloway. "Or at least, it was." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the base seemed to have faded into nothingness. All that remained was the question hanging in. The air, the impossible truth that had just been revealed through actions rather than words. Calloway stood at parade rest, her face composed once more, revealing nothing of what she might be feeling. But her eyes, when they met Riker's, contained something that made the hardened SEAL commander look away first. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only to reveal extraordinary skill when given a chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of hidden courage and redemption resonate with you, consider subscribing to our channel for more tales of unsung heroes. "Commander Riker," Captain Winters said, her voice carrying across the now silent flight line. "I believe we need to discuss Operation Saber Dawn." Riker stiffened, his face draining of color. "Ma'am, that operation is classified." "Yes," Winters agreed. "It is. So is the identity of the pilot who extracted your team that day." She turned to Calloway. Or, at least, it was. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the base seemed to have faded into nothingness. All that remained was the question hanging in the air, the impossible truth that had just been revealed through actions rather than words. Calloway stood at parade rest, her face composed once more, revealing nothing of what she might be feeling. But her eyes, when they met Riker's, contained something that made the hardened SEAL commander look away first. "We should continue this conversation in private," Winters said, breaking the silence. "With all due respect, Captain," Calloway replied, her voice carrying in the stillness. "I believe we're past the point of privacy." She turned to face the gathered personnel. "What you just witnessed was a demonstration of standard combat maneuvers employed during Operation Saber Dawn. Nothing more." Winters studied Calloway for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Lieutenant Calloway will be available to answer technical questions about the F-35's performance capabilities at tomorrow's briefing. For now, I repeat, all personnel, return to your duties." This time, the crowd began to disperse, though reluctantly. Conversations broke out in hushed tones as officers and enlisted alike tried to process what they had just witnessed. Many cast lingering glances toward Calloway as they left. Riker remained where he stood, his team still at attention behind him. "Your office, Commander," Winters ordered. "Now." The walk to the administrative building passed in tense silence. Calloway walked a precise half-step behind Winters, with Riker and his executive officer following. The contrast between the open sky she had just commanded and the confined hallways of the administrative wing was stark. With each step away from the flight line, Calloway's posture grew more rigid, as if she were physically returning to the constraints of her grounded position. Riker's office was Spartan, betraying his temporary status at the base. The four officers entered and Winters closed the door firmly behind them. "Sit," she ordered. Calloway and Riker took the chairs facing the desk. Winters remained standing, while Riker's XO positioned himself by the door. 3 years ago, Winters began without preamble, SEAL Team 8, under Commander Riker's leadership, was deployed to Kandahar province for a classified extraction mission. Intelligence failure led to the team being surrounded and pinned down by hostile forces. Extraction was deemed impossible due to heavy anti-aircraft fire in the area. Riker's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. An F-35 pilot, call-sign Phantom, disregarded direct orders to stand down, entered the no-fly zone, and executed extraction maneuvers under conditions that our best simulation programs still classify as unsurvivable. Winters placed the classified file on the desk between them. All 14 members of Commander Riker's team were successfully extracted with minimal casualties. She opened the file, revealing mission reports and a series of grainy photographs. The pilot's identity was classified at the highest levels, both to protect them from enemy reprisals and because the mission itself involved certain diplomatic complexities. Winters looked directly at Calloway. Despite saving 14 lives, the pilot was disciplined for disobeying direct orders. The official recommendation was dishonorable discharge. Calloway's expression remained neutral, but her hands resting on her knees curled slightly. That recommendation was reduced to reassignment outside of flight duty, with all combat records sealed. Winters turned to Riker. "Commander, you wrote in your after-action report that you owed your life to that pilot. Your exact words were, 'Phantom displayed courage and skill beyond anything I have witnessed in 20 years of service.'" Riker's face had become a mask, unreadable except for a slight pulse at his temple. Then, Winters continued, her voice hardening. "You signed off on their reassignment to logistics when High Command wanted a scapegoat for the intelligence failure that nearly cost you and your men your lives." The accusation hung in the air between them. Riker's XO shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Captain," Riker finally spoke, his voice tight. "With respect, I was not made aware of the pilot's identity. The reassignment paperwork I signed contained no names, only redacted service numbers." "And you never asked," Calloway said quietly. It wasn't a question. Riker turned to her, seeing her, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. No, I never asked. The admission seemed to cost him something. His shoulders, always held with military precision, slumped fractionally. What happens now? He asked, looking back to Winters. That depends, Winters replied, closing the file. Lieutenant Calloway's demonstration today proved beyond any doubt that her skills remain undiminished. The question is whether the Navy still deserves those skills. Calloway looked up sharply. Ma'am? You've served with distinction in logistics, Lieutenant, despite being grossly overqualified. Your reassignment was politics, not justice. I'm prepared to recommend immediate reinstatement to flight status. Winter's expression softened slightly, if that's what you want. For the first time, Calloway seemed genuinely caught off guard. She glanced at the classified file, then at Riker, who couldn't meet her eyes. I need time to consider, ma'am, she finally said. Of course, Winters nodded. Take the rest of the day. Report to my office at 800 tomorrow with your decision. She turned to Riker. Commander, you and I have more to discuss regarding your observation mission. Lieutenant, you're dismissed. Calloway stood, saluted crisply, and moved to the door. As she reached for the handle, Riker spoke. Calloway. She paused but didn't turn. Was it you the entire time, in Afghanistan? Calloway looked back over her shoulder, her profile silhouetted against the office's fluorescent lighting. Every mission assigned a Phantom, every extraction, every impossible run. Yes, Commander, it was always me. She left, closing the door softly behind her. The hallway outside Riker's office was mercifully empty. Calloway walked with measured steps, her face composed despite the turmoil beneath. 3 years of silence, of accepting her fate without complaint, of watching her skills atrophy while she processed requisition forms instead of flying combat missions. All of it now hung in precarious balance. She had almost reached the building's exit when Lieutenant Commander Nyack appeared from a side corridor. Lieutenant, he called, catching up to her. I've never seen flying like that. Thank you, Commander, she replied, not breaking stride. The Kandahar extraction, he continued, falling into step beside her. I've studied that footage 100 times. Everyone has. They show it at the Academy now as an example of the impossible. Calloway said nothing. Why didn't you ever say anything? Nyack pressed. All this time, working logistics while we all thought Phantom was some kind of mythical ace pilot or special program. Classified means classified, Commander, she replied, even when it's convenient to forget that. Nyack stopped walking. For what it's worth, what they did to you wasn't right. Calloway paused at the exit, her hand on the door. What's right rarely factors into these decisions, Commander. The chain of command exists for a reason. Even when the orders are wrong? She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Nyack took an involuntary step back at what he saw in her eyes. Especially then, she said quietly, because someone needs to be willing to pay the price for doing what's necessary instead of what's ordered. She pushed through the door into the afternoon sunlight, leaving Nyack staring after her. The base felt different now as Calloway walked back to her quarters. Personnel. She looked at her with new eyes, some with open curiosity, others with something approaching awe. Word had spread quickly, as it always did in the closed ecosystem of a military installation. Her quarters were small but private, one of the few perks of her officer status that remained after reassignment. The space was minimalist to the point of asceticism, bed made with military precision, desk clear of personal items, closet containing identical uniforms arranged by type. The only concession to individuality was a small bookshelf filled with technical manuals and aviation history texts. Calloway removed her flight suit, carefully hanging it in the closet, and changed into her physical training uniform. She needed to move, to process the day's events through action rather than introspection. The base gym was unusually empty for that time of day. She claimed a treadmill in the far corner and began to run, pushing her body harder with each kilometer. The physical exertion helped clear her mind, allowed her to think beyond the immediate emotional reaction to the day's revelations. She had almost found her rhythm when Master Chief Remington entered the gym, spotted her, and approached with deliberate purpose. "Lieutenant," Remington said, standing beside the treadmill. "Got a minute?" Calloway slowed the machine to a walk. "Master Chief, that was some flying today." "Thank you." Remington glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. I knew it was you, you know. From the start. Calloway raised an eyebrow. I was stationed at Bagram when Phantom became active, Remington explained. Never saw your face, but I prepped your aircraft. Nobody treats an F-35 the way you do, like it's a living thing that deserves respect, not just a weapons platform. The port thruster issue today, Calloway said. That was a test? Remington smiled slightly. Had to be sure, there was no issue. Wanted to see if you'd compensate for a problem that wasn't there. And I did. Muscle memory, Remington nodded. Once you've flown in those conditions, your body remembers even when your mind knows better. The Master Chief's expression grew more serious. Word is Winters offered you reinstatement. Word travels fast. Always does. Question is, what are you going to do? Calloway increased the treadmill's speed again, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. I haven't decided. Bullshit, Remington said bluntly. Pardon my French, Lieutenant, but you knew your answer the moment you felt that aircraft respond to you today. Calloway continued running, her stride even and measured. It's not that simple, Master Chief. Never said it was simple, said you already know. Remington moved to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, we need pilots like you, not just for what you can do in the air, but for what you stand for on the ground. After Remington left, Calloway ran for another hour, pushing herself until her muscles burned and her thoughts cleared. By the time she returned to her quarters, night had fallen over the base. She showered and changed into clean utilities, then sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face in the otherwise dark room, casting harsh shadows across her features. She accessed her personnel file, the unclassified version, and began to read through her service record with clinical detachment, as if studying a stranger's life. A knock at her door interrupted her review. She closed the laptop and moved to answer. Commander Riker stood in the hallway, still in his uniform despite the late hour. His expression was difficult to read in the dim corridor lighting. "Commander," Calloway acknowledged, not inviting him in. "Lieutenant," he replied, "may I speak with you?" She hesitated, then stepped back, allowing him to enter. She did not offer him a seat. "I'll be brief," Riker said, standing awkwardly in the center of the small room. "I owe you an apology." "For which part, specifically?" Calloway asked, her voice neutral. Riker's jaw tightened momentarily. "For not recognizing you. For the way I spoke to you this morning. He faltered. "For signing the papers that grounded me without bothering to learn who you were condemning." She finished for him. "Yes," he admitted. "For all of it." Calloway studied him, her expression giving nothing away. "Why are you here, Commander? Guilt? Obligation? Orders from Captain Winters?" "I'm here because I need to understand," Riker said, an edge of frustration entering his voice. "Why didn't you ever come forward? Why accept reassignment without a fight? You saved my entire team, for God's sake. One word from you, and I would have what?" Calloway interrupted. "Gone against direct orders from high command? Risked your own career to defend mine? The same way I risked mine to save your life?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. "You were Phantom," Riker said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The most decorated combat pilot in recent history, even if the records were classified. And you just accepted logistics duty without a word." "Because the mission was more important than my wings," Calloway replied simply. "Just like your men were more important than my orders that day in Kandahar." Understanding dawned slowly across Riker's face. "You knew who I was from the moment I arrived." "Of course I did. And this morning, when I singled you out, when I mocked you about flying, you gave me exactly what I needed," Calloway finished. "A legitimate reason to get back in the cockpit, one that couldn't be denied or classified away." Riker stared at her, reassessing everything that had happened that day in a new light. "You played me." "I did what was necessary," she corrected, just like in Kandahar. The parallel was not lost on him. He ran a hand through his short cropped hair, a gesture that seemed out of place with his otherwise rigid bearing. "What will you tell Captain Winters tomorrow?" he asked. Calloway moved to the window, looking out at the darkened base. Aircraft silhouettes stood in perfect formation on the distant flight line, barely visible against the night sky. "What would you do, Commander, if you were me?" Riker considered the question with genuine thought. "I'd take the reinstatement, get back in the air where I belong." "Where I belong," she repeated softly. 3 years doing logistics work might suggest I belong elsewhere now. You and I both know that's not true, Riker said. What I saw today wasn't just skill, Calloway. It was purpose. He moved toward the door. For what it's worth, I hope you fly again. The Navy needs pilots who understand when to follow orders and when to trust their instincts. He left without waiting for a response, closing the door quietly behind him. Calloway remained at the window for a long time afterward, watching the occasional aircraft taking off or landing in the distance, their navigation lights cutting bright paths through the darkness. Morning arrived with perfect clarity, the kind of crystalline daybreak that made every detail of the base stand out in sharp relief. Calloway dressed in her formal service uniform rather than her logistics utilities, the fabric feeling both familiar and strange after so long. She secured her hair in a regulation bun and checked her appearance in the mirror, noting the space above her breast pocket where pilot wings should have been. The walk to Captain Winter's office took her past the hangar where yesterday's confrontation with Riker had begun. Already, maintenance crews were preparing aircraft for the day's operations, the rhythmic routine of a naval air station continuing regardless of personal dramas. Captain Winter's aide waved her directly into the inner office, where Winters sat reviewing documents at her desk. "Lieutenant Calloway reporting as ordered, ma'am," Calloway announced, coming to attention. "At ease, Lieutenant," Winters replied, setting aside her paperwork. "Take a seat." Calloway sat, back straight, hands resting on her knees. "Before you give me your decision," Winters said, "there's something you should know." She slid a folder across the desk. "This arrived by secure courier this morning." Calloway opened the folder. Inside was a set of orders transferring her to Naval Air Station Fallon, effective immediately. "The Advanced Tactical Training Command has requested you specifically," Winters explained. "Apparently, your demonstration yesterday made quite an impression when the footage reached certain eyes." Calloway looked up from the orders. "Footage? Did you think something like that wouldn't be recorded?" Winters allowed herself a small smile. "Every camera on this base was tracking your flight. By sunset, the footage had reached the Pentagon. By midnight, decisions had been made." Calloway returned the orders to the folder. "What exactly would I be doing at Fallon?" "Initially, evaluating pilot candidates for advanced tactical deployment, eventually developing new combat maneuver protocols based on your experience." Winters leaned forward. "They want you to teach others what you know, Lieutenant, what only you can teach them." Calloway was silent for a long moment. "And my record? The disciplinary action?" "Expunged," Winters replied, as if it never happened. "But it did happen," Calloway said quietly. "And it happened for a reason." Winters studied her with new interest. "You're not pleased." "I'm concerned," Calloway admitted. "Erasing the past doesn't change what occurred. The decisions I made, the orders I disobeyed, they were real, and they had consequences. Pretending otherwise feels like revisionist history." "Sometimes," Winters said carefully, "the military finds it convenient to revise history when the original narrative no longer serves its purposes." Calloway's expression hardened. "Is that what I am now? Convenient?" "You're valuable," Winters corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes," Winters insisted. "You were convenient as a scapegoat 3 years ago. You're valuable as an instructor now because warfare has evolved and your skills are suddenly relevant again." She gestured to the orders. "This isn't charity, Lieutenant. It's pragmatism." Calloway considered this. "And Commander Riker? What happens to him?" "He's been reassigned as well," Winters said. "He'll be joining you at Fallon as the liaison between SEAL tactical teams and flight operations." This genuinely surprised Calloway. "He agreed to this?" "He requested it," Winters revealed. "Said something about balancing accounts." Calloway fell silent, absorbing this information. Outside, the sound of aircraft taking off punctuated the quiet of the office, a distant reminder of what awaited her decision. "I need your answer, Lieutenant," Winters prompted. "Do you accept the transfer?" Calloway looked down at her hands, then back up at the captain. "On one condition." Winters raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to make conditions." "With respect, ma'am, I believe I am," Calloway replied, a new confidence in her voice. "You said it yourself. I'm valuable now. That gives me leverage I didn't have before." Winters leaned back in her chair, a hint of approval in her expression. "What's your condition?" I want the true story of Operation Saber Dawn declassified, Calloway said. Not to clear my name, but to acknowledge the realities faced by pilots in combat zones, the impossible choices, the human costs of rigid adherence to protocol when lives are at stake. Winters considered her request with surprising seriousness. That would require approval from levels far above my pay grade. Then I suggest you start the process, Calloway replied, because until then, my answer is no. The captain studied Calloway for a long moment, seeing not just the logistics officer she had become, but the combat pilot she had always been. You realize what you're risking. This offer might not come again. I'm aware of the risk, Calloway nodded, but some principles are worth standing for, even at personal cost. I believe you understand that, ma'am. A slow smile spread across Winter's face. I do indeed, Lieutenant. She extended her hand. Consider your condition noted in my formal recommendation. I can't promise results, but I can promise effort. Calloway stood and shook the offered hand. Then, pending that effort, I accept the transfer. Excellent. Winters returned to her professional demeanor. Your transport leaves at 1600 hours. Report to the flight line at 1500 for processing. Yes, ma'am. As Calloway turned to leave, Winters added, One more thing, Lieutenant. Calloway paused at the door. These came with your orders. Winters opened her desk drawer and removed a small box, sliding it across the desk. Calloway approached and opened the box. Inside lay a set of pilot wings, polished to a brilliant shine, alongside silver oak leaves, signifying the rank of lieutenant commander. Effective immediately, Winters said. Commander. Calloway stared at the insignia, emotions she had long suppressed threatening to surface. Thank you, ma'am. You earned them, Winters replied simply. 3 years ago and again yesterday. The rest of the day passed in a blur of administrative procedures and hasty goodbyes. Word of Calloway's promotion and transfer spread quickly through the base, bringing a steady stream of personnel to her office, many of whom had never spoken to her during her time in logistics. She accepted their congratulations with grace but without elaboration, packing her few personal belongings with efficient precision. At 14:55, Calloway arrived at the flight line, her duffel bag containing everything she deemed worth taking. The transport aircraft waited on the tarmac, its cargo ramp lowered. Several other personnel were already boarding, transfer orders in hand. Master Chief Remington appeared at her side. Right on time, Commander. Old habits, Calloway replied. Heard about the promotion, Remington nodded to the wings now pinned above Calloway's breast pocket. Looks better there than in a box. Feels strange, Calloway admitted, like someone else's uniform. You'll get used to it again, Remington assured her, like riding a bicycle or flying an F-35. Calloway smiled slightly at that. Thank you, Master Chief, for yesterday. Don't thank me, Remington shrugged. I just stated facts. You did the flying. They were interrupted by the arrival of Commander Riker, also carrying a duffel. He nodded to Calloway, his expression more respectful than she had yet seen from him. Commander, he acknowledged, noting her new rank insignia. Congratulations. Thank you, Commander, she replied. I understand we'll be working together at Fallon. So it seems. He gestured to the transport. Shall we? As they walked toward the aircraft, Riker spoke quietly. Captain Winters told me about your condition for accepting the transfer, about declassifying Saber Dawn. Calloway glanced at him. Does that concern you? It should, he admitted. Having the full story come out would raise questions about my role in your reassignment, about why I didn't speak up sooner. Yes, she agreed. It would. They reached the bottom of the cargo ramp. Riker stopped, turning to face her fully. I want you to know that I support your request, he said, whatever the personal consequences. Calloway studied him, searching for signs of insincerity and finding none. Why? Because you were right yesterday, he said simply. About doing what's necessary instead of what's ordered. I forgot that somewhere along the way. Maybe it's time I remembered. Before she could respond, a flight technician approached. Commanders, we're ready for departure, if you could board now. Riker gestured for Calloway to precede him up the ramp. As they found their seats in the transport's Spartan interior, Calloway glanced out the small window at the base that had been her prison for 3 years. The sun glinted off the hangars and administration buildings, transforming them into something almost beautiful from this perspective. The cargo ramp closed with a hydraulic hiss, sealing them inside. Engines rumbled to life, vibrating through the metal floor and seats. Calloway closed her eyes, feeling the familiar sensations of pre-flight, though this time as passenger rather than pilot. "Ready for this?" Riker asked from the seat beside her. Calloway opened her eyes, looking not at him, but at the wings on her uniform, catching the light even in the dim interior of the transport. "I've been ready for 3 years," she replied. The aircraft began to taxi, picking up speed as it aligned with the runway. The acceleration pushed them back against their seats as the transport lifted off, climbing into the clear afternoon sky. Below, Naval Air Station Oceana grew smaller, its rigid geometry diminishing until it was just another pattern in the landscape. Calloway watched through the window as they banked west, toward Nevada, and whatever awaited her at Fallon. The transport leveled off, settling into cruising altitude. Beside her, Riker had fallen silent, lost in his own thoughts. She reached into her pocket and removed a small, worn photograph, the same one she had kept hidden in her desk drawer for 3 years. The image showed her standing beside her F-35 in the mountains of Afghanistan, face partially visible beneath her helmet visor, dust and smoke obscuring the background. She had kept it as a reminder of who she had been, of what she had sacrificed. Now, looking at it, she realized it was no longer a reminder of the past, but perhaps a bridge to the future. She carefully returned the photo to her pocket just as the transport hit a pocket of turbulence, causing several passengers to grip their seats anxiously. Calloway didn't flinch. After all, turbulence was just another form of flight. Unpredictable, perhaps, but navigable with the right skills and perspective. And if there was one thing Lieutenant Commander Merritt Calloway understood, it was how to fly through storms. Have you ever witnessed someone receive long overdue recognition for their talents? Share your stories of delayed justice or second chances in the comments. If you believe in the power of perseverance and standing by your principles, join our community by subscribing to see how Calloway's journey continues in Part 3. Naval Air Station Fallon spread across the Nevada desert like a precise geometric pattern imposed on the natural landscape. From the air, the base appeared almost like an abstract painting, sharp-edged buildings and perfect runways contrasting with the rugged mountains that ring the horizon. The transport touched down with a gentle bump, taxiing toward the operations center as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tarmac. For Lieutenant Commander Merritt Calloway, the descent into Fallon felt like crossing a threshold, though whether it led forward or backward in her life remained to be determined. Beside her, Commander Riker unbuckled his safety harness as the aircraft came to a stop. "Welcome to the Top Gun playground," he commented, the first words either of them had spoken in over an hour. "I believe they prefer Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center," Calloway replied, gathering her duffel bag. "Bureaucrats prefer that," Riker corrected. "Everyone else still calls it Top Gun." The cargo ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a welcoming committee of 3 officers waiting on the tarmac. At their center stood Captain Julian Hargrove, the commanding officer of the Advanced Tactical Training Division, his weathered face set in an expression of studied neutrality. Calloway and Riker deplaned together, approaching the waiting officers with matching military precision in their strides. They came to attention, saluting crisply. "Commander Calloway, Commander Riker," Hargrove acknowledged, returning their salutes. "Welcome to Fallon. I trust your flight was uneventful." "Yes, sir," they replied in unison. "Good." Hargrove gestured to the officers flanking him. "Commander Elliot Hayes, head of our simulation division, and Lieutenant Commander Sasha Novak, our lead tactical instructor. They'll be working closely with both of you during your assignment here." Hayes, a lean man with intelligent eyes, nodded in greeting. "Heard a lot about both of you in the last 24 hours. "All of it classified, of course," added Novak, a compact woman whose short-cropped hair and direct gaze suggested no-nonsense efficiency. "Of course," Calloway replied evenly. Hargrove studied them both for a moment. "Your first briefing is at 0700 tomorrow. Until then, get settled in your quarters. Novak will show you the way." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Commander Calloway, that footage from Oceana was impressive. I look forward to seeing what you can do when you're not putting on a show." With that parting comment, Hargrove strode away, Hayes falling into step beside him, leaving Novak to escort the new arrivals. "Don't mind the captain," Novak said as they walked toward the officers' quarters. "He's still processing the fact that Phantom is real and female." Calloway glanced at her. "Word travels fast." "Faster than an F-35, apparently," Novak replied with a hint of a smile. "The instructors have been debating all day whether the Kandahar extraction was skill, luck, or computer assistance. Care to settle the bet?" "All three," Calloway answered. "Always is." They reached the officers' quarters, a modern two-story building with desert-appropriate architecture. Inside, the air conditioning was a welcome relief from the Nevada heat. "Commander Riker, you're in 204, Novak said, handing him a key card. "Commander Calloway, 210. The mess is open until 2100 if you're hungry. Any questions?" "Just one," Calloway said. "When can I fly?" Novak's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine enthusiasm. "Evaluation flight is scheduled for 0900 tomorrow. After your briefing? Fair warning, Commander. I'll be your RIO. I want to experience the Phantom flying firsthand." After Novak left, Riker turned to Calloway. "Looks like your reputation preceded you." "So it seems," she replied, unreadable. "Does it bother you? Being known as Phantom rather than Calloway?" She considered the question with unexpected seriousness. Phantom did things Calloway never could have done. Took risks Calloway shouldn't have taken. Sometimes a call sign is more than identification. Sometimes it's permission. Riker nodded slowly, understanding more than she might have expected. "See you at 700, Commander." "Commander," she acknowledged, heading toward her assigned quarters. Room 210 was Spartan but comfortable, with a bed, desk, small sitting area, and attached bathroom, luxury by military standards. Calloway unpacked methodically, arranging her uniforms with precision in the closet, placing her few personal items on the desk. The worn photograph from Afghanistan went into the desk drawer, no longer needed as a constant reminder, but still too important to discard. She showered and changed into fresh utilities, then sat at the desk and opened her laptop. The email icon showed 17 new messages, all from personnel at Oceana. News of her identity as Phantom had clearly spread beyond the immediate witnesses of her demonstration flight. She closed the email without reading any of them. Whatever they contained, congratulations, questions, apologies, could wait. Instead, she opened the briefing files that had been loaded onto her secure drive, reviewing the training program she would be evaluating and eventually modifying. The current protocols were solid but conservative, emphasizing textbook maneuvers over the kind of adaptive, instinctive flying that had made Phantom legendary. A knock at her door interrupted her review. She closed the laptop and moved to answer. Commander Elliot Hayes stood in the hallway, holding a tablet. "Commander Calloway, may I have a moment of your time?" "Of course," she replied, stepping back to admit him. Hayes entered but remained standing. "I wanted to personally welcome you to the program. Your arrival is significant for us." "Significant how?" Calloway asked. Hayes activated his tablet, bringing up a video file. "This is from our advanced combat simulation program. It's based on footage from actual engagements, including Operation Saber Dawn." He played the video. It showed a digital recreation of the Kandahar extraction, rendered with impressive fidelity. The simulated F-35 executed the same maneuvers Calloway had performed 3 years earlier, threading between enemy fire with impossible precision. "We've been using this as our impossible scenario," Hayes explained. "The unwinnable test. No pilot has ever completed it successfully in simulation." "Because simulation can't account for instinct," Calloway said. "Exactly," Hayes nodded, impressed. "The computer calculates odds, trajectories, physics. It can't factor in whatever it was that made you attempt that extraction in the first place, let alone succeed at it." "What do you want from me, Commander Hayes?" He turned off the tablet. "I want you to help us bridge that gap between what the machine calculates is possible and what a human pilot can actually achieve. The future of naval aviation might depend on it." Calloway studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "Why now? These questions existed 3 years ago when I was being reassigned to logistics." "Politics," Hayes admitted frankly. 3 years ago, the brass wanted to emphasize protocol, chain of command, obedience to orders. The tide has turned. Now they want results, adaptability, the human element that can't be programmed or predicted. So I'm convenient again, Calloway said, echoing her earlier conversation with Captain Winters. You're necessary, Hayes corrected. There's a difference. After Hayes left, Calloway returned to her desk, the conversation replaying in her mind. The sudden shift in how her actions were perceived, from insubordination to innovation, struck her as arbitrary and potentially dangerous. Principles shouldn't change with political wins. She was still contemplating this when another knock came at her door. This time, it was Captain Hargrove himself. "Commander," he said without preamble, "walk with me." They left the officers' quarters together, heading toward the flight line. The sun had set, but the Nevada sky still held a deep blue twilight glow, silhouetting the aircraft parked in perfect formation. "I'll be direct, Commander," Hargrove said as they walked. "Your presence here creates certain complications." "Sir?" Calloway kept her tone neutral. "Half my instructors think you're the second coming of Chuck Yeager. The other half think you're a dangerous maverick who got lucky in Kandahar." He glanced at her. "Which is it?" "Neither, sir," she replied without hesitation. "I'm a pilot who made a judgment call in combat conditions. The fact that it succeeded doesn't make it right. The fact that I was punished doesn't make it wrong." Hargrove nodded slowly. "That's a more nuanced answer than I expected." They reached the edge of the flight line, stopping before a row of F-35s bathed in floodlights. The advanced fighters looked almost predatory in the artificial illumination, machines designed for a singular deadly purpose. "Your evaluation flight tomorrow," Hargrove continued. "It won't be standard protocol. I want to see what you can really do." "What are the parameters, sir?" "No parameters," he replied. "Just you and the aircraft. Show me why they called you Phantom." Calloway considered this. "And Commander Riker, what's his role here?" "Officially, he's our SEAL liaison for joint operations training." Hargrove's expression hardened slightly. "Unofficially, he's here to make amends." "That wasn't my request," Calloway said. "No, it was his," Hargrove revealed. "He specifically asked to be assigned wherever you were placed. Said he had a debt to repay." This surprised Calloway, though she kept her expression neutral. "And you agreed to this arrangement?" "I agreed because having both the legendary Phantom and the SEAL commander she saved in the same training program makes for one hell of a teaching opportunity," Hargrove said bluntly. "Nothing builds credibility like a living case study." They had reached the end of the row of aircraft. Hargrove stopped, turning to face her directly. "One last thing, Commander. Your condition for accepting this transfer, declassifying Operation Saber Dawn. The request has reached the Secretary of the Navy." Calloway's pulse quickened slightly. And nothing yet," Hargrove replied. "But the fact that it wasn't immediately denied suggests the winds are indeed shifting. Don't get your hopes up, but don't abandon them either." With that, he left her standing at the edge of the flight line, the desert night closing in around her as the last light faded from the sky. Morning arrived with the clarity that only desert air can provide, the early sun casting the mountains in sharp relief against a perfect blue sky. Calloway woke before her alarm, body already attuned to the rhythm of flight operations after just one night at Fallon. The officer's mess was half full when she arrived, conversations momentarily pausing as she entered before resuming with slightly heightened intensity. She collected her breakfast and found an empty table, preferring solitude to the curious glances and whispered comments. Riker appeared minutes later, nodding to her before getting his own breakfast and joining her, uninvited but not unwelcome. "Sleep well?" he asked, the mundane question incongruous with their shared history. "Well enough," she replied. "You?" "Haven't slept well in 3 years," he admitted quietly. "Not since Kandahar." The simple statement hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to address. They finished their meal in companionable silence, then walked together to the briefing room. The space was already filled with instructors and program officers when they arrived. Captain Hargrove stood at the front, beside a large screen showing the Advanced Tactical Flight Training Curriculum overview. He nodded to them as they entered, gesturing to 2 empty seats in the front row. "Now that our new personnel have arrived, we can begin," Hargrove announced. "As most of you already know, Commander Calloway and Commander Riker join us under somewhat unique circumstances. Their experience during Operation Saber Dawn will inform significant revisions to our current training protocols." He activated the screen, displaying aerial footage of the Kandahar extraction. The quality was poor, grainy, unstable, partially obscured by smoke and dust, but the maneuvers were unmistakable. The F-35 in the footage moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy physics, executing turns and defensive countermeasures that had most of the room leaning forward in their seats. This footage has been classified until recently, Hargrove continued. It shows an extraction conducted under conditions our best simulation programs classified as unsurvivable. The pilot, call sign, Phantom, he nodded toward Calloway, is now part of our instructor team. The SEAL commander whose team was extracted, a nod to Riker, will be integrating these lessons into our joint operations training. The room erupted in murmurs. Clearly, while rumors had spread, this official confirmation still came as a surprise to many. Questions? Hargrove asked. Lieutenant Commander Novak raised her hand. Sir, what exactly happened in Kandahar? The official records are still heavily redacted. Hargrove looked to Calloway. Commander, care to provide context? Calloway stood, facing the room with the same composed demeanor she had maintained throughout her years in logistics. SEAL Team 8 was deployed to extract a high-value intelligence asset from a mountain compound near the Pakistani border, she began, her voice steady. Intelligence failure led to the team being surrounded by hostile forces with significant anti-aircraft capabilities. Extraction was deemed impossible due to the concentration of enemy fire and the terrain limitations. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I was on standby duty, monitoring comms. When the call for emergency extraction came through, Command issued a stand-down order, citing unsurvivable conditions. I disregarded that order and proceeded to the extraction point. The room had fallen completely silent. The rest is on the footage, she concluded. 14 personnel extracted with minimal casualties. Mission successful, but in violation of direct orders. And for that, you were grounded, Novak stated, incredulity evident in her tone. For that, I was reassigned, Calloway corrected. Chain of command exists for a reason. I broke it. But you saved lives, another instructor protested. Yes, Calloway acknowledged. That's why I wasn't discharged. But military discipline can't selectively enforce orders based on outcomes. That path leads to chaos. Riker stood then, unexpected and unplanned. What Commander Calloway isn't telling you is that I was the one who signed off on her reassignment paperwork. The revelation sent another wave of murmurs through the room. As the commander of the team she saved, my after-action report carried significant weight, Riker continued. I praised the extraction while simultaneously condemning the breach of protocol. I wanted it both ways, recognition for the success, but affirmation of the chain of command. He turned to face Calloway directly. What I didn't know then was the identity of the pilot. That information was classified even from me. I signed papers that grounded the person who saved my entire team without ever looking beyond the redacted service number. The admission hung in the air between them, a public acknowledgement of private failure. Captain Hargrove allowed the moment to linger, then stepped forward. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely why you're all here today, to learn when protocol saves lives and when it costs them, when to follow orders and when to trust your instincts. These aren't academic questions. They're the difference between coming home or not. He gestured to the screen, where the footage of the Kandahar extraction still played on loop. Commander Calloway's evaluation flight is scheduled for 0900. I suggest you all find a good vantage point. History doesn't often give second chances, but when it does, he looked directly at Calloway. They're worth witnessing. The briefing concluded and personnel filed out toward the flight line. Calloway remained seated, watching the looping footage with clinical detachment, as if studying a stranger's actions. Riker waited until they were alone in the room. I didn't know you'd be put on the spot like that. It was inevitable, she replied, still watching the screen. That's why we're here. Is it? He asked. I thought we were here to teach tactics. Calloway finally looked away from the footage, meeting his gaze. We're here to teach judgment, Commander. The tactics are secondary. At precisely 0900, Calloway walked onto the flight line in full flight gear. A crowd had gathered, instructors, officers, even maintenance personnel, all wanting to witness Phantom's return to the sky. Lieutenant Commander Novak waited beside the F-35, also in flight gear, her expression a mixture of professional composure and barely concealed excitement. Ready to make history, Commander? Novak asked as Calloway approached. "It's just ready to fly," Calloway replied, running her hand along the aircraft's fuselage, in an unconscious gesture of connection. The pre-flight checks proceeded with textbook precision, Calloway and Novak moving through the protocols with the synchronized efficiency of experienced aviators. In the cockpit, Calloway felt the familiar embrace of the seat, the controls fitting her hands as if designed specifically for them. "Tower to Phantom, you are cleared for takeoff. Parameters are at your discretion. The sky is yours, Commander." Calloway smiled slightly at the call sign. Official recognition at last. "Phantom acknowledges. We're rolling." The F-35 moved forward, gathering speed with each second until the wheels lifted smoothly from the runway and they were airborne, climbing into the crystal-clear Nevada sky. Below, the base quickly diminished in size, the gathered personnel becoming indistinguishable dots on the tarmac. "Your aircraft, Commander," Novak said once they reached cruising altitude. "Show me what Phantom can do." Calloway took a deep breath, letting the sensation of flight fill her completely. Then she began to fly, truly fly, for the first time in 3 years. What followed was not a demonstration or an evaluation. It was a dialogue between pilot and aircraft, a conversation conducted in the language of physics and instinct. The F-35 responded to her touch like a living creature, performing maneuvers that stretched the boundaries of its design specifications without ever exceeding them. In the rear seat, Novak alternated between professional observations and involuntary exclamations of amazement. The G-forces pushed them against their seats, then seemed to release them into momentary weightlessness as Calloway executed sequences that flowed together with choreographed precision. "Holy," Novak caught herself. "That was the Kandahar spiral descent. I've studied that move for years." "Modified for peacetime conditions," Calloway confirmed. "In combat, it's tighter, lower, with countermeasures deployed simultaneously." "Is that even physically possible?" "Depends on the pilot," Calloway replied, "and how much they trust their instincts over their instruments." For 45 minutes, Calloway put the F-35 through its paces, demonstrating not just technical mastery, but a fundamental understanding of the aircraft's capabilities that transcended formal training. When they finally returned to base, the landing was so smooth, it seemed as if the runway rose to meet them, rather than the other way around. A crowd had gathered at the flight line, even larger than before, Takeoff. As Calloway and Novak emerged from the aircraft, spontaneous applause broke out, not the polite acknowledgement of a demonstration well performed, but the genuine recognition of mastery witnessed firsthand. Captain Hargrove approached as they removed their helmets. "Well, Commander, how does it feel to be back where you belong?" Calloway looked from the captain to the aircraft, then to the assembled personnel still applauding. "Like I never left, sir." The debriefing that followed was unlike any in Fallon's recent history. Instead of the typical evaluation format, it evolved into an impromptu masterclass, with Calloway explaining the principles behind the maneuvers she had demonstrated, while Novak provided enthusiastic context from the RIO's perspective. "The key isn't pushing the aircraft to its limits," Calloway explained to the packed briefing room. "It's understanding that those limits aren't fixed. They're dynamic, changing with conditions, with the pilot's state, with the mission parameters. But the computer systems have programmed limits," one of the instructors pointed out. "Warning indicators, automated override protocols, which assume standard conditions and standard responses," Calloway countered. "In combat, there are no standard conditions. The difference between possible and impossible often comes down to the pilot's willingness to trust their judgment over the machine's programming." The discussion continued well into the afternoon, with senior instructors who had initially viewed Calloway with skepticism now leaning forward in their seats, taking notes and asking increasingly detailed questions. By the time Captain Hargrove called an end to the session, a palpable sense of excitement had filled the room, the feeling of witnessing the beginning of something transformative. "We'll continue this tomorrow," Hargrove announced. "Commander Calloway will be developing a formal curriculum based on today's demonstration and discussion. Commander Riker will integrate these principles into the Joint Operations Protocols." As personnel filed out, animated conversations breaking out among the instructors, Hargrove approached Calloway. "A word in private, Commander?" They moved to his office, a space that reflected its occupant's personality. organized, utilitarian, with only a few personal touches suggesting the man behind the rank. He closed the door, then retrieved a secure tablet from his desk. "This came through during your flight," he said, activating the device and handing it to her. "Eyes only." Calloway took the tablet, reading the message displayed on the screen. It was a directive from the Secretary of the Navy, marked with the highest security classification. "Operation Saber Dawn has been declassified," she read aloud, the reality of the words sinking in slowly. "A formal review of all personnel actions related to the operation is ordered, with immediate rectification of any identified injustices." She looked up at Hargrove. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" he asked. "You made it a condition of your transfer. Apparently, someone was listening." "Someone with significant influence," Calloway noted. Hargrove moved to the window, looking out at the flight line, where her F-35 still sat. "The winds are shifting, Commander. The military is recognizing that blind adherence to protocol can be as dangerous as reckless disregard for it. Your case has become something of a rallying point." Calloway set the tablet on his desk. "I never wanted to be a symbol, Captain. I just wanted to fly." "Sometimes we don't get to choose what we represent," he replied. "But we do get to choose how we handle the responsibility that comes with it." A knock at the door interrupted them. Hargrove's aide entered after his acknowledgement. "Sir, Commander Riker requests permission to join you. He says it's regarding the declassification directive." Hargrove looked to Calloway, who nodded slightly. "Send him in." Riker entered, still in his service uniform from the earlier briefing. He nodded to Calloway, then addressed Hargrove. "Sir, I've submitted my formal statement for the review process, acknowledging my role in Commander Calloway's reassignment and recommending full restoration of her service record." "That was quick work, Commander," Hargrove observed. "The statement has been ready for 3 years, sir," Riker replied. "I just needed the opportunity to submit it officially." Calloway stared at him, genuinely surprised for the first time since their reunion. 3 years? "I wrote it the day after you flew that extraction," Riker admitted. "When I realized what had happened, what I had been part of. I couldn't submit it then. Classification protocols prevented it, but I kept it updated, waiting for a chance to set things right." The revelation hung in the air between them, altering the dynamics of their relationship in ways neither had anticipated. Hargrove cleared his throat. "Well, it seems the wheels of justice are finally turning, however belatedly. Both of you have duties to attend to. Commander Calloway, your curriculum proposal is due on my desk by 0900 tomorrow. Commander Riker, I expect your integration plan by the same deadline." "Yes, sir," they replied in unison. As they left the office together, walking through the administrative building toward the officers' quarters, neither spoke immediately. The Nevada sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the base. "Why didn't you tell me?" Calloway finally asked. "About the statement." "Would it have mattered?" Riker countered. "It was locked away like everything else about Saber Dawn, just words on paper until today." "It would have mattered," she said quietly. They reached the outdoor path that led to their quarters, pausing as other personnel passed by, nodding respectfully to both commanders. "I never thanked you," Riker said once they were alone again, "for saving my team that day, for saving me." "You didn't know it was me," Calloway reminded him. "I know now," he replied simply. "Thank you." The words were inadequate for the magnitude of what had transpired between them. The lives saved, the career sacrificed, the years lost to bureaucratic injustice. But they were sincere, and in that moment, they were enough. Calloway nodded once, accepting what was offered. "You're welcome, Commander." They continued walking, the silence between them now comfortable rather than charged. As they neared the officers' quarters, Riker spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said in the briefing, about military discipline and selectively enforcing orders based on outcomes." "What about it?" "You're right, in principle," he acknowledged. "But there has to be room for judgment, for the human element that can't be codified in regulations or programmed into computers." Calloway considered this. "That's what we're here to teach, isn't it? Not just how to fly, but when to trust the instrument panel and when to trust yourself." "Exactly," Riker agreed. "Finding that balance between discipline and initiative, between following orders and following your conscience. That's the real lesson of Saber Dawn." They reached the entrance to the officers' quarters, pausing before going inside. "Do you regret it?" Riker asked suddenly. Disobeying orders that day, knowing what it cost you? Calloway looked toward the flight line, where her F-35 stood silhouetted against the sunset, its sleek profile a stark contrast to the natural landscape beyond. "No," she said with absolute certainty. "Some prices are worth paying." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the desert air already warming as personnel gathered for the day's operations. Calloway, in her flight uniform with wings and commander's rank proudly displayed, walked toward the training center with purposeful strides, her curriculum proposal tucked under her arm. The base felt different today, or perhaps it was Calloway herself who had changed. The weight of the past 3 years seemed to have lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. She was halfway to the training center when Captain Hargrove intercepted her, accompanied by a full honor guard, a formal military detail usually reserved for ceremonies and high-ranking visitors. "Commander Calloway," Hargrove said, his tone official, but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "Your presence is requested on the main parade ground immediately." "Sir?" Calloway questioned, caught off guard by the formality. "The Secretary of the Navy's representative has arrived," Hargrove explained. "The declassification review has been expedited, and certain decisions have already been made." Calloway's heart rate increased slightly. "What kind of decisions, sir?" "The kind best announced publicly," Hargrove replied enigmatically. "The entire base personnel have been assembled." The parade ground was indeed filled when they arrived. Officers, enlisted personnel, civilian contractors, all standing at attention in perfect formation. At the front, a temporary stage had been erected, with the flags of the United States and the Navy flying on either side. Commander Riker stood on the stage alongside several high-ranking officers Calloway didn't recognize, and one she did. Rear Admiral Eleanor West, the Navy's Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air Warfare. Hargrove led Calloway to the stage, where she took her place beside Riker. He gave her a slight nod, his expression suggesting he knew more about what was happening than she did. Admiral West stepped to the microphone. "At ease," she commanded, and the assembled personnel relaxed their postures marginally. 3 years ago, West began without preamble. An F-35 pilot with the call sign Phantom executed an extraction mission under conditions our best simulation programs classified as unsurvivable. 14 lives were saved that day. But because the mission involved disobeying direct orders, the pilot was removed from flight duty and reassigned. The parade ground remained silent, though Calloway could feel the attention of every person present focused on her. Today, with the declassification of Operation Sabre Dawn, we can finally acknowledge both the extraordinary achievement and the injustice that followed. West turned to face Calloway directly. "Commander Merritt Calloway, step forward." Calloway moved to stand beside the Admiral, maintaining her military bearing despite the unexpected spotlight. "By direct order of the Secretary of the Navy, your service record is hereby restored to its full and proper status, with all disciplinary actions related to Operation Sabre Dawn expunged." West paused, allowing the words to sink in. "Furthermore, in recognition of your exceptional service and the lives saved through your actions, you are hereby awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor." A naval aide approached, carrying a velvet box containing the medal. West took it and pinned it to Calloway's uniform, just above her pilot wings. The citation reads, "For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, Commander Calloway distinguished herself by heroism while engaged in an aerial extraction under extreme combat conditions, displaying exceptional courage, airmanship, and devotion to duty in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." The parade ground erupted in applause, spontaneous, genuine, and sustained. Calloway stood at attention, her expression controlled, but her eyes revealing the depth of emotion the moment evoked. When the applause finally subsided, West continued. "Additionally, Commander Calloway is hereby appointed as the new director of the Advanced Tactical Flight Program here at Fallon, with a mandate to implement the lessons of Operation Sabre Dawn throughout naval aviation training." This announcement brought another round of applause. West stepped back, gesturing for Calloway to address the assembled personnel. For a moment, Calloway stood silently, gathering her thoughts. The desert sun illuminated the parade ground, reflecting off the polished brass of uniforms and the metal surfaces of distant aircraft. The moment seemed suspended in time, a perfect convergence of past redemption and future purpose. "Thank you, Admiral West," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I accept this. Recognition not for myself, but for every pilot who has ever had to make impossible decisions in combat conditions." She looked out over the assembled personnel, meeting their gazes directly. The lesson of Saber Dawn isn't about disobeying orders or following them blindly. It's about understanding that our greatest strength as military aviators lies in the human judgment that can never be fully programmed or regulated. Our training must reflect this reality, balancing discipline with initiative, protocol with adaptability. Calloway turned slightly to acknowledge Riker, standing at attention nearby. Commander Riker and his team survived that day in Kandahar, not just because of flying skill, but because every person involved trusted their training and their instincts when conventional wisdom said failure was inevitable. That's what we'll teach here, not just how to fly, but how to trust yourself when it matters most. As she finished speaking, something unexpected happened. Commander Riker stepped forward and, without orders or protocol demanding it, dropped to one knee before her, not in proposal or formal ceremony, but in the ancient gesture of a warrior acknowledging absolute debt. "The lives of my men, my life, we owe you everything," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent parade ground. The symbolic power of the moment rippled through the witnesses. One by one, the SEALs present knelt as well, followed by pilots, then other officers, until only Calloway, Admiral West, and Captain Hargrove remained standing. West, recognizing the spontaneous nature of the gesture, made no move to stop it. Instead, she stepped back, allowing the moment its full emotional weight. Calloway, overwhelmed but composed, extended her hand to Riker. "Stand, Commander. We all serve together." He took her hand and rose, the respect in his eyes unmistakable. Around the parade ground, the others stood as well, the formation resuming its military precision, but now infused with something deeper than mere discipline. Admiral West returned to the microphone. "Dismissed," she ordered, and the assembly began to disperse, conversations breaking out as personnel returned to their duties. Later that afternoon, Calloway stood on the flight line, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The day had been a whirlwind of briefings, congratulations, and administrative transitions as she assumed her new role as program director. Riker found her there, approaching with a small group of his SEAL team members, all of whom had been with him in Kandahar. "Commander," he acknowledged, "the team wanted to thank you personally. Most of them never knew who pulled us out that day." The SEALs each thanked her in turn, their gratitude sincere but understated in the way of professionals who understand the true weight of life and death decisions. When they had gone, Riker remained. "That was quite a ceremony this morning." "Unexpected," Calloway admitted. "Not to me," he said. "I was informed yesterday. Admiral West wanted to ensure I would be present." "The kneeling," Calloway said. "That wasn't planned." "No," Riker agreed, "but it was earned." They stood in companionable silence, watching as the first training flights of the evening began to take off, the aircraft climbing into the darkening sky with precision and purpose. "So, Director," Riker finally said, "what's our first order of business?" Calloway smiled slightly, her gaze following the aircraft as they disappeared into the distance. "Teaching the next generation of pilots that sometimes the most important instrument in the cockpit isn't on the panel, it's behind the controls." The desert air cooled as twilight approached, the mountains casting long shadows across the base. On the flight line, maintenance crews prepared aircraft for the next day's operations, their movements choreographed by years of practice and discipline. Calloway's F-35 sat among them, no longer just another aircraft in the fleet. Overnight, someone had painted a call sign beneath the cockpit, Phantom, making official what had long been classified. In the fading light, the letters seemed to shimmer slightly, as if possessing a life of their own. Like the pilot herself, the name had emerged from shadows into recognition, from secrecy into legend. And like the pilot, it would now shape the future of naval aviation, teaching generations of aviators that true flight happens not just with wings and engines, but with courage and judgment, qualities no computer could ever fully replace. As darkness fell over Naval Air Station Fallon, the base lights illuminated the flight line, casting the F-35s in a glow that emphasized their lethal beauty. Among them, Phantom's aircraft stood ready for tomorrow's mission, just as its pilot stood ready to reclaim not just her own legacy, but to forge a new one for all who would follow. Has someone in your life ever received long overdue recognition for their quiet heroism or sacrifice? Or perhaps you've witnessed a moment when true skill finally received the acknowledgement it deserved. Share your stories in the comments below. If you believe in second chances and the power of standing by your principles, join our community by subscribing.